Video editing is a very processor-intensive work, but the Apple team behind Final Cut Pro has made it look like a walk in the park. They made a few brilliant decisions that make the UI very responsive and buttery smooth. Here's the thing, you too can apply these techniques to your web app. In this video, I will talk about 4 different programming decisions that the Final Cut Pro team has made to make their UI be so responsive. It just requires a few simple tweaks to how you think about your code and architecture. Modus Create engineers, including myself, have been applying these techniques over and over again with amazing success. So much that our clients report significantly better customer satisfaction rates, and with that comes better conversion rates as well. Before we take a deep dive, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get an easier access to tips and tricks from the best web development team in the world. Okay, so the first brilliant programming decision is focusing on above the fold content. When editing a video, we like to focus on a short time span, just a few seconds of that video. This is the most important content for me. Apple or Final Cut Pro does a great job at prioritizing any work to my above the fold content or my visible area of the screen, just that bit of the timeline that I'm focusing on. Now this can easily be applied to any web application. Just prioritize downloading of the resources to the visible area only. Intersection Observer API is perfect for this task, especially because on the web, people usually start from the top of the page. For example, Amazon and YouTube do a great job at loading comments when user scrolls down a little bit. Now, I don't need to load comments unless I actually scroll down. I want to focus the downloading of my resources to the hero or to the video or whatever the content is above the fold. Now, did you know that you can do that with JavaScript as well? You can prioritize downloading of JavaScript resources in your application. With optimal usage of code splitting and lazy loading, you can download just the JavaScript that your users need to see that section of your web application. If you want to learn more about how to do that with React, make sure you see my video on loading anything under 3 seconds on 3G. And this leads me to the second valuable decision. Offload heavy work when user is idle. Nothing kills productivity like heavy processing. Final Cut Pro does a great job at that because it lets me use my timeline and do the work. The background rendering is going to kick in when I'm idle. And when I resume work, it's going to pause. Now, this is a phenomenal example how Final Cut Pro leverages processing when user is idle. On the web, this is even more important because we have that single thread that uses the UI, the JavaScript, and everything. Interactivity on the web is imperative. Delays in any feedback will make your app look jittery, unresponsive, lagging, poor quality. You just don't want that. You don't want it, your users don't want it. I suggest you pause or defer any activities that are going to use your processor or even the GPU while user needs interaction. And that's things like animation or even view rendering, the parts of the view that's below the fold. On idle callback is a perfect API that you can leverage for this. Doing the work when the user is idle is going to greatly improve the responsiveness of your main thread. But you can also move things out of the thread. Now this gets us to the point number 3, keep the main thread underutilized. Final Cut Pro prioritizes user interaction. Now, when it needs to do any heavy work, it tries to employ all the possible available processing power. This makes sure that the work that needs to be completed is actually done as soon as possible. And web applications are even more sensitive to processing, especially if they use that single available thread. And that's why you should offload any processing to web workers. This is really an upgrade from moving things, shifting things to when user is idle. Now you can do things when user is idle, and you can offload things in a worker thread. For example, if your application does any graphics rendering, creating shapes, or anything advanced with charts and similar libraries, you could use web workers together with off-screen canvas. This will make your application a lot snappier, and all the heavy processing will be moved outside the interaction layer with your user. And the final fourth tip is assume successful transactions. And this is my favorite. When I add media to Final Cut Pro, they can usually be many dozens of gigabytes large. But you know what? Final Cut Pro doesn't just show a spinner, doesn't tell me that something is loading, downloading, processing. It lets me use those resources immediately. Final Cut Pro lets me be productive without waiting, and your web applications should do the same. Now, anytime you interact with an API, you could assume that that interaction is going to be successful. In my experience, under 1% of all API transactions are going to result in a failure. So that means that 99% and over are successful. So why don't we just let the user use the application, assuming that the transaction is going to be successful. In that 1 or under % of chance, we can simply show an error dialog. Maybe we can restore some of the state, get them back to the form, or do something like that. It may be a little bit more extra work than showing a modal and a loading indicator, but it's a lot more effective. You're doing this for your user. I appreciate it when Final Cut Pro lets me be productive, and I guarantee that your users appreciate it when they can be productive with your web application. These 4 simple tricks, just simple changes in how you think about processing your code, may change how your users think and feel about your application. They will reward your business with much better ratings, satisfaction rate, conversion, and word of mouth. Thank you for watching today. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and like this video. If it's useful, also share it with your network. Over and out.